sometimes it's easier to understand a term by talking about what it's not before you talk about what it is.
Yeah.
Forgiveness is not excusing an offense. People think that if I forgive you, it means that I'm saying, oh, I excuse you for how you hurt me. Well, normally we think about excusing in terms of somebody did something and they either didn't intend to do it or they are incapable of doing it otherwise. For example, if you're a close friend and you are at a social gathering and your friend trips and spills Diet Coke all over your brand new suit, you still have a dry cleaning bill on your hands, but you will probably excuse your friend because you knew it was an accident. They didn't intend to be malicious about it. Or, for example, if you have children, young children particularly, who are a little rambunctious and not quite so coordinated, they could easily spill a glass of milk or water or juice at the table, and most likely you will excuse that because they can't do otherwise. So that's when we think about excusing an offense. It's also not overlooking an offense. That's saying that something that hurt me really was nothing. And that may be easy to do when you've got, let's say, a 5-cent offense, even a $1 offense. But if you're talking about bigger $50, $100, $5,000 offenses, you might overlook it, but that's not the same thing as forgiving.
Right.
It's not this, although Scripture uses the word pardon, in our culture, forgiveness is not pardon either. Judges pardon, or government officials pardon, or the president pardons people and are released from prison. That's not forgiveness either, although we might forgive and have the effect of canceling a debt. Scripture talks about forgiveness in terms of debt canceling quite often. And so that, we might say you no longer owe me something in terms of that. So those are some concepts that I think we frequently confuse with forgiving.
What would be wrong about the summation that forgiving is not forgetting?
Well, if you have a frontal lobotomy, then you can forgive and forget. You may have trouble remembering a lot of other things as well. God forgets, but yet there's also a crucified lamb sitting on the throne. So there's this paradox about even God's forgiveness in terms of like God forgetting our offenses. So our brains are actually wired to remember, not wired to forget. Again, small offenses we can easily overlook. Bigger offenses, the more hurtful it is, the more our brain is actually built to encode that hurtful event deeply and broadly. So it's why people have a hard time letting go of it, because it's just right in front of you all the time.
Well, and sometimes we encode and embed those even more deeply than we do our happiest, most joyful memories.
We do. In fact, that's true. Negative things are embedded more deeply than positive things. I'm going to talk to the Lord about that. I think I got it backwards, but it does have a survival, mechanism to it.
That evolutionarily we were, meant to really remember that we don't want to go over there for whatever reason, where there's harm.
That saber-toothed tiger is not kitty, 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 come here.
We've talked about what forgiveness isn't. What is forgiveness?
What is forgiveness? I'm going to use a couple different definitions for it, because one can look at forgiveness in a number of different ways. One way to think about it is in terms of keeping a pathway to my heart open. That may be the result of forgiving. One of my favorite researchers, Everett Worthington, likes to think about a practical definition of forgiveness this way. It's the process of replacing negative emotions. Those negative emotions would be anger and hatred and bitterness, resentment, and gradually replacing those negative emotions with positive emotions such as beneficence, grace, agape love, compassion. So emotionally, we would think about forgiveness as bringing about a change in how we feel towards the other person. Forgiveness can also be a decision that we make. So one can have an experience of emotional forgiveness, that deeper sense of release, which I think is what most people long to experience. But prior to getting there, we can actually make a choice to be a forgiving person and choose to forgive. I think those are two helpful ways to look at forgiveness. I'll also add this to the definition, and that is many of us think about forgiveness as you would a light switch. The light is on or the light is off. Yeah, and normally if you think about forgiveness as a command function, and Scripture does indeed present it that way many times, the problem comes is I make this decision to forgive, and then my offender messes up again, or I'm reminded of the offense and I feel all sorts of anger, and then I say to myself, oh my gosh, because I have these negative feelings again, I must never have forgiven to begin with. I'm going to suggest that that's really problematic and not a very helpful way to think about forgiveness. God may be able to do that, but I'm really clear that most of us don't possess deity. So we're left with the human struggle of a process of forgiveness. So rather than thinking about forgiveness like a light switch on or off, think about it like a rheostat. Calling it a dimmer switch is an unfortunate term. Maybe,
but nobody knows what a rheostat is anymore, so you have to.
So think about it more like a volume knob that you can turn it up, and sometimes there's a static, and so the sound is not as clear as it could be. So on days when you're feeling on top of the world, when you've had enough sleep, when you've had enough to eat, when life has been going well, we're really forgiving then. We're magnanimous and gracious, and we can almost forgive the world, even that person that really hurt us. However, when you're tired and hungry and stressed and life isn't going well and your kids are annoying and your spouse is even more annoying and you've got deadlines to meet and someone steps on your toes, then forgiving becomes really more challenging.